secret is I just smile and say, live for today. I'm sitting on top of the world, on top of the sun came up and I gotta say, see it in a whole new way. I'm sitting on top of the world, on top of the world. Yeah. On top of the world. Yeah. I'm sitting on top of the world, on top of the world. Yeah. On top of the world. Yeah. I'm sitting on top of the world, on top of the world. Ask me what my secret is. On top of the world. I'm sitting on top of the world, on top of the world. Ask me what my secret is. On top of the world. I'm sitting on top of the world, on top of the world. Yeah, I'm sitting on top of the world, on top of the world. Yeah. Yeah, I'm sitting on top of the world, on top of the world. Hello world, wake me up to another good morning, time to go. Got that smile upon my face, cause there's excitement in the chase, this I know. Yeah, I'm going for the ride and find myself, I am alive, and I soar. Still I run towards the wind and let the challenge draw me in, cause I want more. Oh, we are all looking for adventure. 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 Oh, wake up heart and wake up mind, and see the world is yours to find. And oh, with every passing day there's more, calling you out to explore. Get up and go. There is joy found in the race, and I feel it in the place where I'm free. And I simply can't deny it, that I feel adventure calling out to me. Yeah, we are all looking for adventure. 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 We are all looking for And I'm living free, living free, living free, and I was meant to be. Living free, living free, living free, and I was meant to be. I'm living free, living free, living free, and I was meant to be free. Meant to be free.
Hello! Magandang hapon sa lahat and good afternoon, climate reality leaders, and good afternoon to our friends and fellow climate advocates watching our live telecast on Facebook. I'm Laika de la Cruz, a climate reality leader from Tacloban but is now based in Manila, and I'm currently with the Climate Change Commission. I'm going to be your host for today's Klimatotohanan episode entitled Ladies First, Women's Stories and Climate Resilience. Pero hindi ako nag-iisa ngayon. Joining me today is my fellow climate reality leader, Ivana Joaquin. Hi, Ivana.
Hi, Laika, and hello to our viewers in Zoom and on Facebook. I'm Ivana. I'm a climate reality leader and a coordinator for the youth cluster of the Climate Reality Project Philippines. So this is the second of two Klimatotohanan episodes that are in support of the observance of National Women's Month. 2 Saturdays ago, Our Lady's first episode focused on the accomplishments of women movers, shakers, and change makers on climate action. We discussed the policies and frameworks that enable women to contribute to the climate crisis and solutions. Today, we will delve deeper into the impacts of climate change to women and vulnerable groups, specifically in urban poor, indigenous peoples communities, and other marginalized sectors.
Yes, Ivana, ang focus natin ngayon ay maintindihan kung paano nga ba nag-i-interact ang gender issues and climate change impacts at kung paano ito nakakaapekto sa mga kababayan natin na nasa mga komunidad na nangangailangan ng suporta mula sa pamahalaan. Napakaswerte natin because we are joined today by an esteemed panel of speakers who have the opportunity of working with various communities. Kaya wag na natin patagalin pa. Let me introduce our first guest. She is a colleague from the Climate Change Commission, Ms. Jean Regulano. Jean is a licensed environmental planner currently working as a supervising technical officer at the People Survival Fund unit of the CCC. She oversees the facilitation of various PSF-related activities and programs under the auspices of the CCC. She also provides technical support in enhancing capacities of eligible proponents in accessing the PSF. Jean is a graduate of Human Ecology from the University of the Philippines and is currently finishing her master's degree in population studies in the same university. Hello, Jean! Kamusta ka? Pwede mo bang ma-share sa amin paano mo sinelebrate or isa-celebrate pa lang ang National Women's Month?
Magandang hapon, Laika and Ivana, at magandang hapon sa lahat ng nanonood at nakikinig dito sa online event na ito. So, yeah, it's Women's Month, and of course, we focus first on empowering ourselves and empowering yung mga women around us by celebrating their successes and helping each other, no, and lalo na in times of pandemic. So, happy Women's Month to all listening and watching this event today.
Thank you, Jean. And our next speaker is a medical doctor who's been working to build community-based women's health programs in poor rural and urban communities since 1983. In 1995, she and 12 of her female colleagues established Likhaan Center for Women's Health, Inc. Their NGO is dedicated to sexual and reproductive health and rights and social justice. Likhaan currently runs 8 primary reproductive health clinics and 11 women and youth organizations in poor areas of Metro Manila, Bulacan, and Eastern Samar. She has also provided technical support to the authors of the Reproductive Health Law from 2004 to 2012. She is a member of the Department of Health Secretariat coordinating the national implementation team of said law and of the Gender and Rights Advisory Panel of the Sexual and Reproductive Health Research Department of the World Health Organization since 2017. We have with us today Dr. Junice L. Demeterio-Melgar. So hello, Dr. Junice. How are you and how are you celebrating National Women's Month?
Hi, everyone, and happy Women's Month. Ang isang matanda kagaya ko ay medyo sequestered at home, no? So I'm trying to celebrate Women's Month in the time of COVID, actually by talking with many of women who are not with a sexual reproductive health group, but are very interested in women's health issues, no? So medyo busy kami nakikipag-usap sa mga college students of Guanming University is a Buddhist college. So talagang bago sa amin yun. We also talk with SK members, Sangguniang Kabataan members in Sultan Kudarat and Lanao del Sur and Sarangani. So these are new. And then this talk with you, and then we have another talk with women with disability. So I think it's good to be talking with different sectors about women's issues, no? And even climate change is our issue. Oh.
Salamat po, Dr. Junice. Naku, napaka-busy niyo po pala. Pero buti na lang at napanyayaan niyo ang aming imbitasyon for you to join us. But batang-bata pa po kayo, ma'am. Okay. Our next guest is the current Media and Communications Officer of Lilak, Purple Action for Indigenous Women's Rights. Lilak is an organization of Indigenous women leaders, feminists, anthropologists, human rights advocates, environmentalists, and lawyers who support the fight to defend the rights of Indigenous women. let us welcome Ms. Shar Balagtras. Hello, Shar. Ikaw, can you share with us kung paano mo celebrate or how do you intend to celebrate this Women's Month?
Isang mapagpalayang hapon po sa ating lahat. Happy Women's Month, no? Nagsimula po yung March sa akin na lumabas actually ang Lilak sa hanay ng World March of Women Pilipinas. Nagkaroon kami ng flash mob sa Plaza Miranda. Pero kung baka hindi po tayo updated sa mga nangyayari, actually hinarang kami ng pulis nung mismong flash mob nung March 8. So ganun nagsimula yung Women's Month ko, no? So malapit nang matapos may isang linggo pa pala. Pero after noon, tuloy-tuloy lang po yung invitations sa Lila, katulad nito. So maraming salamat po ulit sa pag-imbita sa amin. Tuloy-tuloy pa rin po yung pakikipag-communicate namin sa mga Indigenous women kahit hindi kami nakakapunta sa communities. Tinatry namin yung best namin through phone, through online, through Zoom. So ganun po namin ngayon celebrate yung Women's Month. Work from home muna kasi tumataas yung COVID cases natin.
Thank you very much, po. Actually, like to stay safe, stay safe for now. That's quite the route to take. I hope that you get to meet them in person soon. Okay, so our last speaker is from our youth cluster. She is a climate reality leader and an incumbent counselor and chairperson of the Climate Mitigation and Adaptation Committee of the Sangguniang Kabataan of Barangay Tamaro in Bayambang, Pangasinan. An English Studies major at the University of the Philippines in Likhaan. She is currently a member of various organizations that have joined the fight for climate justice. So these are organizations like Likhaan, Youth Advocates for the Philippines, 2030 Youth Force for the Philippines, ASEAN Youth Advocates Network, International Youth United Philippines, and Akbayan Youth, whose advocacies include fighting for the climate, for the environmental rights and the basic rights of Indigenous peoples. So let's welcome Lisse de Vera. Hi Liz, how are you celebrating this month?
Hello everyone, thank you TCRPH for inviting me. Thank you Ivana, thank you everyone. So I'm celebrating, first of all, Happy Women's Month to all of us. I'm celebrating Women's Month by helping and empowering more women in my sector and in the community. I am part of various projects this Women's Month, currently spearheading a project in my organization for the Women's Month. It's a webinar about internalized misogyny. And yeah, it's been quite interesting, and it's very it's my honor actually to be able to take part and to contribute in celebrating women and advocating for women's rights. So I hope marami pa pong mga activities and events na makapag-share ng experiences ng women like this one. And marami pong organizations ang maging active about this cause.
Yes, thank you, Lisse. And hindi lang dapat nagtatapos sa Women's Month yung mga ganitong mga advocacies. Kung pwede nga, all throughout the year nga to gawin eh. So before we proceed with our discussion, I would like to remind the climate reality leaders in our Zoom room and our viewers on Facebook that you can participate in the discussion today by sending your questions in the chat box or on the comments section of our Facebook Live.
All right, so let's get down to business. In the last Klimatotohanan episode, our guests discussed how and why global disruptions like the COVID-19 pandemic and the prevailing climate crisis cannot be considered gender neutral. To dive deeper into the disproportionate impacts of climate change, we would like to ask our speakers to share with us stories of how climate change has affected women that they've encountered through their respective lines of work. So let's ask Dr. Junice and Shar first. So are there any specific stories or encounters you remember that depict how climate-related events have exacerbated existing women's issues in urban poor and Indigenous peoples communities? How have climate-related disasters increased women's burden of work, violence, and issues on sexual and reproductive health and rights in the marginalized sectors of society? Moreover, how did the COVID-19 pandemic further compound these existing vulnerabilities? So Dr. Junice, if you may, please go first.
Yeah, I think I have more experiences than many of you because of my age, just joking, no? Pero yeah, I get affected very personally, no? So I live in a part of Quezon City that never was flooded before. But since Ondoy, talagang chronic, no? Every time it rains, we get ready because our house could get flooded with the very first floor could be flooded. Pero this is very small. This is trivial compared to the trauma of, for example, Haiyan. Haiyan in our communities in Eastern Samar demolished their families, their themselves, no? So for many years they've been traumatized by the typhoon there. And of course, hindi remitting, no? Yung tuloy-tuloy talaga yung dagog, and may even Eastern Samar itself cannot progress because of this. But in that time, ang hindi lang yung lives, no? Of course, we had to do a lot of post-traumatic stress reduction there. Pero yung iba ay hindi na nila mabalikan nga yung lupa nila, di ba? For a long time, I think the land is only being rehabilitated now. They lost their families. They never could know for certain kung yung buhay pa yung families nila na that they lost, no? So all those things, with time, they were able to rehabilitate, but yun na nga, tingin ko nga mas mabilis pa yung nature na nagre-recover kaysa yung psychological trauma sa mga tao. And then yung isa doon, of course, so these are the direct impact, the lives and, well, the loss of lives, what that meant. But the disruption of services, no? So everything, including health services. So maraming nabuntis doon dahil walang contraceptives, maraming nabuntis na namatay o kaya ay nagkaroon ng complications because they could not get to the hospitals. May mga reported na tumaas yung bilang ng adolescent pregnancy at that time, and of course that's continuing until now. And violence against women. So talagang ang mga rehab NGOs to nagtatayo ng women's spaces. And I sure hope, no, that those spaces are continued, na hindi lang siya parang disaster only for disaster only. Kasi nga, the way the country is experiencing climate change, yung talagang it's a regular occurrence for some places. And all those services should be there regardless of meron bang ngayon, may crisis ba ngayon, COVID ba ngayon, baha ba ngayon. I think there should be a focus on a continuing disaster response in all those places. So yun yung aming experience sa Likhaan.
Thank you, Dr. Junice. Yes po, just to share, my family is from Tacloban and they were there nung Typhoon Haiyan and nakita din po nila firsthand yung issues that you have shared, especially with women. Well, sinasabi nga po ng mga kapatid ko, life will never be the same after Yolanda. So yeah, salamat po sa pag-share. Mapunta tayo kay Shar. Pwede mo bang mabahagi sa amin kung paano naapektuhan ng climate-related events ang kalagayan ng kababaihan sa Indigenous peoples communities?
So 1 year na, 1 year na po tayong nasa lockdown. Ganitong panahon, March 2020, nag-lockdown. So nagkumustahan, no? Sa Lilak, kinumusta namin yung mga Indigenous women partners namin. Sabi nila, wala silang makain kasi hindi maganda yung ani. Sobrang init, wala silang maani. Kaya wala silang makain at hindi sila makalabas para bumili ng pagkain at walang dumadating na relief sa kanila. Hindi nga lang din ni-release walang dumadating na information sa kanila tungkol sa COVID. Maraming Indigenous communities, kinailangan namin i-text mismo sa kanila kung ano yung COVID. During this time, lockdown na, no? Ano ba yung COVID? Paano to nakakahawa? Ano bang dangers nito sa atin? Hindi nila alam yun kasi bigla na lang silang sinabihan na huwag kayong lalabas kasi may COVID. And then yun lang. So kung maaalala natin, no, may mga checkpoints, yung mga checkpoints hinaharangan ng military o ng police, may dalang baril. May dalang baril pero walang pagkain. Yun lang yung yung solusyon ng gobyerno, no? So may mga partners kami nagsabi sa amin noon, hindi sila natatakot actually sa COVID. Natatakot sila mamatay sa gutom. Kasi wala talaga silang maani sa init o hindi sila makabenta. Yung ibang mga communities na merong naani, hindi nila mabenta kasi hindi sila makalabas sa komunidad nila. So, ganun yung simula ng COVID lockdown para sa mga Indigenous communities. And since then, ang Indigenous communities natin, Indigenous women natin ay on survival mode hanggang ngayon kasi hindi naman kumagaan yung sitwasyon. In fact, 1 year of lockdown, naniniwala ko na things actually got worse. Ang hirap isipin na, teka, ano na ba? Ano bang nangyayari? Bumubuti ba ang lagay natin? Parang hindi naman. So, yung Indigenous women natin, survival, no? Talaga. May epekto na yung climate change sa kanila na matagal na. Wala na silang mataniman. Kung yung init naka-apekto sa ani nila, meron din naman na wala na talaga mataniman kasi yung lupa nila kinonvert na, kinuha na ng mga corporations katulad ng minahan, ginawa na nilang minahan, ginawa na nilang industrialized plantation, ginawa na nilang dam, ginawa na nilang kung ano-ano. So, wala na rin silang mataniman for food. And yun, so yun yung sitwasyon ngayon sa Indigenous communities natin na matagal na nangyayari pero mas pinalala pa. May masasabi, may mga social inequalities, mga injustices na hinighlight ng COVID-19 pero bukod sa hinighlight, siguro ni-reveal siya ng pandemic, talagang pinalala pa ng pandemic and actually yung response mismo ng government sa pandemic, yung nagpalala sa sitwasyon sa mga rural and Indigenous communities natin.
Yes, actually, that's so true. It's so much clearer now. The things that we have to do and the things that we have to eventually prioritize. So hopefully we'll be able to move towards that by working together and just getting the right people involved, just getting as many people involved. This is something that's happening now. And it's something that we have to do something about now. All right, so let's go on to Liz. So as a member of Sangguniang Kabataan Council, what stories of vulnerabilities and climate impacts can you share with us in dealing with your constituencies, especially young women and girls?
Yes, thank you, Ivana. So I agree with what the other guests have said. No? With climate change, these tasks of advocating are becoming more difficult. Extreme weather events such as droughts and floods have greater impact on the poor and most vulnerable, and according to the data of the IUCN, 70% of the world's poor are women. And studies have shown that women disproportionately suffer the impacts of disasters, severe weather events, climate change because of cultural norms, no? And the inequitable distribution of roles, resources, power, especially in developing countries. And we all know that climate change pose impact, exacerbate the droughts, floods, and typhoons. And being in the Philippines, we are a tropical country. We are really affected by climate change kasi mainit na nga yung temperatura natin, mas umiinit pa. And anong epekto nun? Siyempre mas lumalakas yung typhoons because we're in the Pacific, and the weather, the extreme weather will eventually contribute to the extremity of the typhoons. And sobrang kawawa yung vulnerable communities. Sobrang kawawa ang mga vulnerable sectors when it comes to these kinds of climate issues. For example, I am volunteered for the Typhoon Ulysses hotline. I'm actually the advisor the senior advisor for the Typhoon Ulysses volunteers during the Typhoon Ulysses. And sobrang nakakapanghinayang and sobrang nakakalungkot isipin na hindi naging handa ang ating mga kababayan pagdating dito sa mga ganitong kalamidad, sa nangyaring kalamidad. Meron pa sana tayong magagawa at meron sanang pwede sanang na-prevent yung casualties. And yung casualties dito, hindi lang basta-basta mga gamit sa bahay. More than that, buhay ang naging kapalit ng kawalan ng paghanda sa mga ganitong kalamidad. At sobrang nakakalungkot yon. Lalo na yung sa Cagayan, kasi pagkatapos naming mag-volunteer for the rescue operation sa sa Marikina, sa Rizal, and all those areas that were flooded during Typhoon Ulysses, we then transferred our efforts and resources to Cagayan kasi nagkaroon ng calls for help for Cagayan kasi nga masyadong nakasentro sa Metro Manila yung attention. So merong mga taong buti na lang kinalampag ng mga taong social media na tulungan ng Cagayan. Nakita natin kung ano yung naging sitwasyon nila, ang sitwasyon nila that time. At nakakalungkot na sobrang lala, sobrang merong kakulangan sa paglabas or pag-disseminate ng information at hindi sila masyadong na-inform daw beforehand na mag-release nga ng tubig, ang dam, and all those. So, paano natin yun ma-prevent, no, in the future? So, I really do believe that, there are sectors that are most vulnerable to climate change. And some of them, are women, and all the marginalized sectors, the indigenous people. Actually, wala ngang masyadong status update, diba? Kung anong nangyayari sa mga indigenous people during calamities and during these kinds of events, of unfortunate events. And ngayon naman, gusto ko rin i-highlight yung pandemic situation natin ngayon kasi indirectly or directly, it's really an environmental issue also, the pandemic situation that we have right now. Kasi women are experiencing, according to the data of the UP Population Institute, women are experiencing there are more instances of gender-based violence sa households dahil merong mga kababaihan na natatrap kasama ang kanilang mga harassers and oppressors sa loob ng kanilang mga tahanan. And how does this affect climate advocacy? Kasi intersectional naman talagang issues, no? We have to make sure that no one is left behind. And itong pandemic situation natin ngayon, it's really, kung titingnan natin, epekto rin siya ng environmental issues and ng climate change kung tutuusin. Kasi merong epekto for example, may epekto ang klima sa pag-transfer ng mga vaccines, may epekto siya. And ngayong pandemya, meron tayong mga kababaihan na nawala ng trabaho, na ano na lang sila sa bahay, nawalan sila ng trabaho, and karamihan sa mga sector sa labor industry na well represented ang women ay nag-shift to online and had to, to stop. So, naapektuhan talaga yung kabuhayan ng mga kababaihan. So, ilan lang yun sa mga unfortunate events and calamities na hindi natin inaasahan, na hindi natin napaghandaan, na tunay ngang naapektuhan ang mga kababaihan. And some of these, not just natural calamities, but also the pandemic situation that we have right now,
Yes, Liz. Yes.
Yeah.
You're right that this pandemic and the climate crisis na-exacerbate yung social and economic impacts, lalo na sa vulnerable and marginalized sectors. At tama ka rin na madami pa sana tayong magagawa para iwasan ang mga ganitong pagkakataon. So, we now shift to Jean. For you, Jean, how about your experience working with communities in accessing climate finance? Sa mga PSF and other climate finance project proposals na na-encounter mo, reflected ba itong mga stories of vulnerabilities and risk to women and other issues na na-share earlier ng ating mga guests, like exacerbating nga yung social and economic disparities, especially for women? We asked this because in the last episode, our guests underscored the need for gender inclusion in climate projects to go beyond statistics. There must be an integrated gender analysis based on realities on the ground. Jean?
Thank you, Laika. No? And let me also connect my response dun sa mga initial responses ng other speakers. Of course, this event kasi allowed me to really reflect on things na ano ba talaga yung ginagawa natin, no? To improve yung mainstreaming of gender on climate actions. Particularly on our work, Laika and I are working on climate finance for the CCC. So I'm staying here na for, I think, around almost 5 years, turning 5 years in July. No? And I've seen a lot of developments, including na doon, of course, yung how we really integrate gender on evaluating proposals or on, dun sa pagbibigay natin ng capacity building activities or programs sa ground, sa local government units. In fact, and then I see myself na being affected by this also, but hindi ko siya ganun tinitingnan eh. Because I think it was in 2016 and 2017 when we started working on project proposal review, ganyan. I sense something na lacking and the way we evaluate proposals, that we only consider the geographical locations, let's say the local government units, that we evaluate them based on ano bang meron sa LGU, ano bang meron sa barangay, ano bang meron sa purok, but we're not really looking into inside the households. So, and then as said by Lisse then, na marami nangyayari internally as affected by the pandemic and initially as affected, of course, by climate change and disasters. And that's why I think that's one big push for me to take nga population studies in UP Population Institute now. And ang research topic ko is really looking into how each member of the households are being affected by this, and how these are really reflected or considered in the plans of local government units, and of course later on by national government. So nakita na natin yun, and we're slowly addressing those concerns that we want to, kung small scale na yung tinitignan natin, is smaller pa natin yung scope, because there are really parts of the population, parts of the whole demographic characteristic of a local government unit that's not being considered up until now. For the PSF, for the People's Survival Fund specifically, nakita na yan ng government when they crafted the law. They included the Philippine Commission on Women as one of the members of the PSF board. And in the process of, dun sa whole process flow of the PSF, we have been considering gender actions and mainstreaming yung gender analytics, and of course going beyond the statistics, as you said, yung mga previous episodes, wherein we really identify. Now we know ilang babae yung affected, ilang pregnant and lactating women are affected ng specifically ng disasters and climate change, how we move forward. So we also include, of course, how other countries na may similar problems as ours are addressing these types of concerns, and yun yung gusto natin i-apply. And of course, as we go through the development sa PSF and promoting climate finance, investing on climate actions, we take into considerations the marginalized, and of course, the women community and other oppressed and all the other powerless sectors in the community.
Yes, maidagdag ko lang din sa sinabi ni Jean. It is the same with the Green Climate Fund. And I think na-discuss na din to ni D. Christine the last episode. And for the information of everyone, ang Green Climate Fund ay ang financial mechanism na nabuo under the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change na naglalayong i-assist yung mga developing countries tulad ng Pilipinas na magkaroon tayo ng mga climate adaptation and mitigation projects. So ang GCF ay may gender policy na nagdidikta na dapat may gender assessment and consideration sa lahat ng projects na pinapa-approve sa kanila. So sa experience namin, hindi talaga makakapasa ang isang project sa GCF kung walang gender analysis, kung saan tinitingnan yung gender equality situation ng country natin and the targeted sectors or communities. Isa din sa mga requirements ng GCF is yung gender action plan na dapat may gender responsive activities, performance indicators, and sex disaggregated targets. And dapat included din yung mga targets na to sa project results framework. That's the reason why kasama din yung PCW sa GCF Technical Working Group. So yeah, Ivana?
Yes, thank you, Laika, and thank you, Jean, very much for your insights and all of this information that we need to digest and then further analyze as we get into our professional fields, especially youth. Okay, so from stories of vulnerabilities and risks, let's shift the conversation towards stories of resilience. In our First Ladies First episode, it was discussed that empowering and investing in women are key to combating the effects of climate change. The agency of women must be utilized. So our questions for all of our guests are these. In your respective capacities, how are you or your organizations supporting women and advocating for their welfare and rights? Let's start with Dr. Junice. Dr. Junice po?
Just turning on my mic. I was reacting actually to the earlier conversation about gender analysis. And for women, for those of us who consider ourselves women, no, all issues actually of climate change affect women. No? So whether it's our access to food, to water, to health care, to power, all of these are, so hindi mo mahihiwalay. In fact, baka yun yung kulang nga sa mga gender natin na it doesn't maybe touch on what are the issues of women that link to climate change, because I can't imagine na may magsabi na hindi, medyo yung akin parang walang kinalaman. So I think women's rights are very rooted. There is a two-way, a bi-directional relationship actually between women's rights and climate justice. And hindi mo talaga matatanggal yan. Baka yun na nga yung sinasabi. The analytic framework, which sometimes is packaged in a very technical way, but maybe could be better packaged if it were rights. No? Yung karapatan niya talaga din namang kumain ka. And these are all related to the power structures that actually stop us from, di ba, accomplishing both rights and climate justice. Sa amin sa Likhaan, and we are primarily a women's health, reproductive health and rights group. Ang isang usapin na medyo actually ang history, no, parang hindi siya pinapalaki or parang nati-trivialize even ng climate justice people is actually the access to contraceptives. Very, very direct yung the number of people that we have with their emissions, di ba? And ang ayaw lang talaga namin dyan, pag may element ng population control, when it's rights-based, it's not rights-based. When development people say, ay, dapat lahat kayo mag-family planning, etc., that's coercion. But when you even just ask yung mga babae, sino ang ayaw magbuntis pero hindi nagagawa yon, no? Yung tinatawag na unmet need sa Pilipinas, mga 4 to 5 million yan. All over the world, 74 million. And there are many calculations, no? Nabigyan mo lang yung power ng women na makontrol niya yung number of children niya to only those that she would like and she could support. Ang laking, di ba, yung mga tonelada ng carbon dioxide waste, madami yon. And yeah, so that's one. Sex education in young people also has the same effect. And yet, baka yun na nga, maybe I'm putting attention now to some of the structures in our society that actually prevent a conversation, a sober conversation about sexuality and reproduction and contraception. So yun ang pwede naming matulong. Tingin ko ito yung pwede talagang strongly we can advocate and do. But also because we are women, we haven't stopped at just this work. Sa Likhaan, and we're also considering other RH NGOs, kahit yung energy consumption namin, yung talaga sa lahat ng opisina namin, pagka alas 5 na, yung aircon wala na, 'di ba? Yung mga even those things kasi would do something, no? Yung pagbiging efficient mo, having solar panels in our roofs, no, sa aming mga opisina. And we are very thankful for this awareness that we got from another environmental group that said, Junice, actually we can measure your energy efficiency. We can also actually we can help train your women to assemble solar panels. So pwede pala talagang gawin, and even yung composting, no? So on top of the SRH work, we can actually teach women to do the maximum that they can do actually for climate change. So yeah, that's my experience, no?
Yes po, tama po kayo, that human rights of women and climate justice are indeed connected, and dapat po talaga pagtuunan ng pansin yung linkage na ito. So thank you, Dr. Junice. How about in your organization, Shar?
I agree with Dr. Junice na yung women's rights are very connected to environmental rights, to land rights. I remember meron kaming partner, dumagat. So yung sa mga dumagat, ang kinaharap nila ay construction ng Kaliwa Dam, na pag tinayo yung dam, lulubog yung buong community nila. So yun yung kinaharap ng komunidad niya. Sabi niya sa amin, hindi naiintindihan siguro ng mga taga Maynila, pero ang forest sa kanila, ang gubat, ay source of food nila, source of medicine nila. Kung the way na in-explain niya nga sa amin ay yun yung aming refrigerator at ang aming mercury drugs. Kung para makarelate yung mga nanonood sa kanya na taga Maynila. Ganun kahalaga yung natural resources, yung environment para sa mga katutubong kababaihan. No, kaya hindi mo pwedeng i-advocate ang women's rights na hindi mo rin ina-advocate ang environmental rights at ang land rights, indigenous women's or indigenous people's rights. Connected sila talaga lahat. So sa Lilak, matagal na panahon na kasama ang Lilak sa iba't ibang networks, iba't ibang NBI networks, kagaya ng Alyansa Tigil Mina, kagaya ng Sampakan Forum, so and Stop Kaliwadam. Ilan lang yan sa mga environmental groups na sinasamahan ng Lilak, nag-advocate together with them, and we make sure na yung perspective and voices ng indigenous women sa mga issues na to ay talagang naririnig. And of course, naniniwala rin kami sa Lilak na ang climate change ay, to really mitigate climate change, kailangan mo talaga ng malawakang pagbabago sa mismong sistema, kung paano nag-ooperate din ang ating government, kung paano yung pagtingin ng ating gobyerno sa development. Kasi nakita natin sa lockdown kung anong klaseng development yung iniisip nila. Kung narinig natin, maaalala natin, habang lockdown, habang yung mga rural and indigenous communities natin ay natatakot sa COVID, nag-aalala kung saan nila kukunin yung susunod nila na kakainin, ang government natin sinabi sa mga mining companies na sige, tuloy niyo lang yung operations niyo. In fact, mas gawin niyo pang aggressive. Kasi yan yung solution natin para makarecover yung economy natin. So ang solution ng government para makarecover daw yung ekonomiya ng bansa ay minahin pa natin, no? Sirain pa natin yung mga natural resources natin, ibenta natin. And it's so, I don't know the word, it's just so ridiculous kasi alam naman natin na napakaliit ng contribution ng mining sa economy natin. We know the numbers. Pero yun pa rin yung gusto nilang i-drive home na, hindi, magmina tayo, kailangan natin itong gawin. So habang pandemic, matatandaan natin sa Homonhon Island, despite na naka-lockdown yung buong Eastern Samar, yung buong probinsya, pinayagan pa rin ng DNR na na mag-dock yung ship kahit napakadelikado, kumuha ng chromite ore. Partners ng Lilak, Indigenous women, mga tuwali sa Didipio, Nueva Vizcaya. So ang kinaharap naman nila ay Oceana Gold Philippines Incorporated, isang 25 years na nagmimina sa Nueva Vizcaya. Habang lockdown, April 2020, nagpasok sila ng mga oil tankers, dambuhalang mga trucks na may daladalang diesel. And then bakit ito shocking? Kasi expired na yung mining permit ng Oceana Gold. And then come April, may kasama silang 100 police, PNP, kasama nila, in-escort yung mga trucks. Syempre, panic. Matagal na kasing nagbabarikada yung mga kasama nating mga katutubo doon, mga tuwali. Nagbabarikada sila kasi nag-expire na nga yung mining permit. Ayaw na nilang papasukin yung minahan. So, hinaharangan nila. So, wala silang nagawa. Nagkaroon ng violenteng pagdi-disperse ng People's Barricade. Kung kaya natin i-search, may videos ang Lilak nasa Facebook namin. Pwede ko rin naman i-share mamaya. Kung gusto nyo, i-share ko sa inyo personally yung link. Very violent and very, hindi ko mahanap yung salita dahil nung pinadala sa amin yung video nung isang ng partner namin, si Ate Joanne, maririnig mo yung iyak ng mga katutubong kababaihan. Hindi dahil, sinasaktan sila, syempre, no? Tinutulak. Imagine natin yung mga police shield, tinutulak sila. May isang partner namin, hinampas siya ng police shield sa paa niya, kaya dumugo yung paa niya. Pero hindi more than that. Pero other than the violence itself, yung laban nila yun na, teka, ayaw na nga namin ng mina bakit nyo pinipilit sa amin? So doon talaga, and hanggang ngayon very traumatized yung Indigenous women natin sa Didipio. Hanggang ngayon sinasabi nila, may panalo ba? Kasi nung last year nagtatanong kami, kailangan huwag tayong mag-give up, kailangan isipin yung mga panalo natin kahit maliliit. Sinasabi nila sa amin, may panalo ba? Nakapasok na naman sila. 2 beses after na pumasok rin, may pumasok ulit na truck. Months after, escorted again by police, of course. So yun yung nangyayari. Yun yung pagtingin ng gobyerno natin sa natural resources natin. It's for profit. It's a food for the communities. It's not medicine. It's for profit. Yun yung tingin. So, kaya natin to sinasabi kasi yun nga, yung sinabi ni Doc kanina, importante no na hindi ka lang nagsistay, nakikita mo yung interconnectedness ng mga nangyayari. And malaking opportunity, I think, hindi ko parang generally masabi, I don't feel good about the pandemic, but then it became an opportunity to just look at things differently na, ito pala yun. Ito pala. Pag ito ginawa ng gobyerno natin, sinabi ni Duterte, connected pala to dito, ganyan. So, yun yung naging drive ng Lilak during pandemic to just really talk with communities. This is what's happening. Itong nangyayari as a national, this affects you. So dapat talagang manindigan tayo, magsama-sama tayo. So I'm just Lilak is very glad then to be invited to this talk na very diverse yung panel. So yun yung ginagawa namin. We try to makisawsaw makisawsaw sa iba't ibang mga issues and say na hey, connected yan sa amin. So tara magsama tayo. Yun. So yun ginagawa namin.
Yes, actually, it's really good to be aware about these kinds of things, that these kinds of things are happening, and that we have actually the capacity, to do something about it, to at least help change the mindset. And just thank you so much for sharing these kinds of stories, because like, well, honestly, that's heartbreaking, like, to know that these kinds of things are happening and like so soon within the year of the pandemic. My goodness, it just makes you want to do more things. Just inspires more people to say make it stop, because it doesn't make sense that we're doing this to other people. You know, like people. Yeah. So that's like positive change. We need it now. Right. Okay. So let's get the youth perspective. Liz, please tell us about your organizations and how you support women and advocating their welfare and rights.
Actually, I agree so much with Doc Junice and Shar. Kasi regarding the indigenous people's rights, actually sila nga dapat yung kinokonsulta ng gobyerno when it comes to, isa sila sa dapat na kinokonsulta talaga ng gobyerno when it comes to framing policies, doing laws, especially when it comes to environmental policies, kasi they are really one with their nature. And talagang meron silang malawak na kaalaman about the history of their environment and about their communities. Pero yun nga, as Shar shared, unfortunately, nakakaranas talaga sila ng oppression, violence mula sa mismong gobyerno na dapat na nagpoprotekta ng kanilang mga karapatan at nagpoprotekta ng kanilang karapatan isa na sa lupa na kanilang pagmamayari. And yeah, it's good that Shar mentioned about indigenous peoples kasi I believe that we must also highlight cultural diversity talaga among women. Kasi as a language major and yeah, as the head of the environmental committee in my barangay, these women are from different cultures and that come from different perspectives. So we must highlight cultural diversity when it comes to framing policies related to climate action and climate justice. Kasi hindi lang naman actually sa women, but all people view and experience the world uniquely. And so that's why I mentioned kanina na dapat kinoconsult ang indigenous peoples when it comes to their land. Kasi malawak ang kaalaman nila at meron silang ancient knowledge talaga when it comes to their environment. And we must not frame the policies as too restraining. It should always be culturally flexible. And we should always welcome new ideas when it comes to policy making, revisions, and because aside from we come from different perspectives, we cannot take away the fact that times are changing. Kagaya nga niyan, hindi natin ini-expect na magkakaroon ng pandemic. So hindi nakapag-adjust yung climate climate policies and all that really affect different sectors. And hence, as a language major, nakikita ko yung importansya ng the vital role of language when it comes to policy making. We should structure the language we use in these policies. We should make it adaptable to the changes happening in our environment. And we should highlight diversity, cultural diversity of women and different sectors coming from different perspectives, especially in the Philippines, na culturally diverse. So it's actually good to look at how women in our indigenous communities can contribute to policy making. And yun, as an SK naman, kasi as the head of my environmental committee, share ko lang, no, kasi hindi talaga, unfortunate lang, pero hindi talaga nabibigyan ng prioritization ang projects under environmental and climate adaptation and mitigation committee, which I both head. And actually, we're trying to work on that kasi more on educational talaga projects. We're trying to integrate actually the educational committee projects with my committee. Kasi kung titingnan mo, importante talagang edukasyon when it comes to informing people when it comes to the climate action. Kasi first and foremost, hindi talaga na pag-uusapan ng mga kabataan dito sa barangay namin, specifically, ang climate action. And that's so unfortunate. So I'm trying to make an effort talaga to inform the youth about the urgency of climate issues by this coming Earth Day, and as we hindi naman lang during Earth Day ang ating laban para sa kalikasan, it's every day. So I'm trying to integrate, to work and coordinate with the educational committee para sa isang webinar that will tackle the urgency of climate issues. And by climate issues, I mean also the sanitary and environmental issues that we're experiencing here in Barangay, and to actually take act. How can we as youth contribute to climate action, not just in our community, but nationally and hopefully international, in the international level. And thank you.
Thank you, Liz. Yes, you are right na we must always highlight cultural diversity, and isa yung mga indigenous people sa kinukonsulta ng gobyerno dapat sa pag-develop ng policies, especially those related sa climate change. So we could ask Jean to share our efforts in advancing women's rights amidst this climate crisis. Jean?
Thank you, Likhaan. No? So as we see and as we know naman even beforehand that we are really facing a range of complex crises that we need to address integratively. Kumbaga, hindi mo mapag-iisa kasi hindi pwedeng may maiwanan. So siguro if you ask, of course, unahin natin for the Climate Change Commission, since we are a policy-making body, we make sure that we craft policies and programs, also parang identify programs and projects and activities, of course, that are really based on participatory and consultative approaches and methodologies. Hindi pwedeng tayo lang yung nagdidikta kung ano yung pwede at ano yung mas maganda. Kasi it's really important that we really look kung kanino at kung saan nanggagaling yung problema at ano yung mga rationale behind this. Ang pinaka nakakaalam niyan, of course, the communities, the local government units, the local community organizations, the farmers organizations, the women's organizations, so on and so forth. The list is too long for us to look into, but at least we need to get representatives. And siguro it's also a good appeal, no, for all women sitting in government positions, all women working in government offices and government agencies, that we stand up for those women left behind, for this marginalized and those women in marginalized and oppressed and powerless communities. We need to stand for them because kaya tayo nandito at least for the CCC, when we look, if we look into our HR records naman, it's good to share that in the CCC we have that fair gender ratio of employees, no? So, ang maganda, hindi lang tayo nandun Nandito na tayo sa government, might as well be the voice of those who cannot step yung feet nila on the ground na ito na gumagawa ng mga polisiya, ng mga programa para sa ikabubuti ng communities. So, it's an appeal, really. Hindi natin kailangan mag-sympathize and empathize. Hindi yun yung kailangan ng local women, yung mga women on the ground suffering from this range of complex crises. We need to stand for them, all the policies. Kung meron tayong chance to be part of a policy-making process or a decision-making process, ibigay natin yung lens natin coming from these communities, from these groups of women suffering from the ground. It's good to hear stories, of course, and it's kung mas mapalad, like some of the Climate Change Commission staff then, before the pandemic, of course, we're able to go dun sa local government units and really interview people. Talagang yun yung tinitignan natin. We get insights from the ground. Gamitin natin yung experiences and knowledge natin dun. Let's make yung opportunity given to us or the opportunity and privileges na meron tayo to speak for those who can't. So I think that's what the CCC does and what other government agencies and government staff and personnel can also do. Of course, in partnership or in supplemental and complemental works then from the private sectors and non-government organizations.
Oh my gosh, so inspirational. Yeah, all of that. All of the things that our guests discussed during the segment. So thank you, Jean. Indeed, efforts to advance women's rights continue amidst the COVID-19 pandemic and the climate crisis, and we can't afford to lose momentum. We must be relentless in educating women at the margins of society, ensuring their access to adequate sexual and reproductive health care, and creating more opportunities towards sustainable livelihoods. So in this next segment, we'll focus our discussion on integrating gender analysis in national and local development planning, as well as scaling up the services being provided for women by non-government organizations like Lilak and Likhaan. But before this, we have a few reminders.
Yes, Ivana. The branch would like to thank all climate reality leaders who committed to help in the rollout of the Mobility Awards nationwide round and the Metro Manila Bike Count project. Last week, volunteer climate reality leaders had an insightful and productive meeting with the Institute for Climate and Sustainable Cities and Manila Moves on how they can be engaged in the implementation of these initiatives. As discussed during the meeting, the branch needs more volunteers for data validation and management, mapping, visualization, bike count, and design to join our team. They are also looking for more partner organizations, promotional allies, sponsors, and media partners. If any of you could lend your time and expertise, please do not hesitate to reach out to the branch. Let us work together toward advancing active and sustainable mobility in our cities.
We are also inviting our Pinoy climate reality leaders to join the Klimatotohanan production team. So Klimatotohanan is a fortnightly webcast of the Climate Reality Project Philippines showing every other Saturday, 4 to 6 o'clock in the afternoon. This fortnightly webcast is a venue for dialogue amongst Pinoy climate reality leaders to increase their knowledge and deepen their understanding of climate change and to help them challenge themselves to take bolder climate action. So if you're unable to join the production team, we still invite you to watch the webcast and join the discussion. So you can help us promote our episodes, like and share our webcast on your social media handles, and host watch parties.
Thank you, Ivana. So for the next segment, as mentioned by Ivana earlier, we will focus our discussion on integrating gender analysis in national and local development planning, as well as scaling up the services being provided for women by non-government organizations like Likhaan and Lilak. But before we get into this, I'd like to direct first the attention of everyone in these statistics. The World Economic Forum's Global Gender Gap Report released last year indicated that the Philippines ranked 16th out of 150 economies, including the gender gap in the areas of economic participation and opportunity, educational attainment, health and survival, and political empowerment. More recently, the Gender Diversity Benchmark for Asia recognized our country as the first overall in gender diversity in the workforce among 10 Asian countries. Kung babasahin natin ang mga reports na ito, parang wow, ang advance na pala natin, di ba? But has this report progress trickled down to the marginalized sectors of society? Kumbaga, para sa mga nasa laylayan ng ating lipunan, do these numbers even matter? Bilang kayo po yung talagang bumababa sa ating mga vulnerable communities, is this reported progress in gender equality already felt on the ground, especially in more vulnerable communities? If not, ano po yung mga nakikita nyong gaps? Is it in policies or in implementation? Let's start with Dr. Junice. Dr. Junice?
I think we have to be very careful about the statistics, no? Because there are different indicators when they talk about the gender gap. It's really between men and women. And even in the Philippines, mas marami nga tayong mas mataas na educational attainment, di ba? Sa men. So it's not actually, if we want an international indicator, you look at the GDI, the Gender Development Index, because that's really development, no? So ilan ang hindi lang yung may trabaho, ano ba yung kanilang, kahit yung ranko nila sa mga trabaho, etc. And we are ranked there. I think we were 147 out of 189 countries. So hindi po tayo hindi po tayo top. Actually, parang we dropped, or we increased somewhat, but we were in like, there were 4 tiers. We were in the second tier, but we were close to the bottom of the second tier. So I think we have to disabuse ourselves of that illusion na mahusay. Kasi alam naman talaga natin, poverty hasn't changed since 40 years ago, di ba? So if you're talking especially about the lives of those at the margins, wala namang significant, no? And And I worry when there are mga ganito na nagsasabi na okay na tayo kasi sa gender, and I think pinapalaganap yan sa World Economic Forum, ay mas mataas pa tayo sa Canada, etc. But this is gender gap. So siguro sa Canada, talagang mas mayaman yung lalaki nila kaysa sa babae. I think sa ARM, yung gender gap nila baka wala kasi lahat sila mahihirap. So I think that's how you need to clarify the gender gap. In terms of, I think pumunta ka na lang sa slum areas, pumunta ka doon sa mga indigenous communities natin. Alam natin, hindi nagbabago, di ba? And I think that's the sad thing because it's not just in climate change, but everywhere, poverty-wise and of course health-wise. There has been no substantive change. Kaya baka yun yung, we can make small changes. Ang sinasabi nga natin, individually, our behaviors can change, family-wise, sa mga communities natin, posible talaga yan. Pero kung gusto nating nagbabago, like for example, are we content with just trickle down? Yung parang yung power ay talagang hindi na share. We know that has been bad for climate change, for women's health. That's really bad politics, no? So the structure of politics does not help. We know that the economic approach has never helped, no? So yung mga sinasabi natin kailangan ng redistribution. Kaya yung sinasabi din ng iba, so long as we don't address these structural issues na alam natin nag-exacerbate lang, exacerbated, I don't think talagang pwede tayong magpadala dito sa mga parang pang tapik sa yeah, you're doing okay. I think we need to look at the structural power differences which have remained basically the same, and so long as we don't have an activist there at the national level of government, kasi napaka-fractured din yung government, di ba? So even if one government, one LGU is doing fine, ang LGU ay one out of 1,600 LGU. So even if one LGU is doing fine, kung yung walang critical mass, wala rin talaga. So maybe I'm talking like an old woman who has been in this struggle for so many years. But yeah, we haven't lost hope na talagang a day will come when we will all come together. And I know even we are fragmented. Our group here, our groups outside, the CSO groups are really fragmented. And until we can come to a common understanding and maybe yung paano ba tayo magre-respetuhan given our different ideologies, etc. I don't think we can change this kind of government that has been dominating us for so long,
Thank you, Dr. Junice, and thank you for enlightening us on how to approach the statistics and giving us this kind of alarming information po about the Gender Development Index na nasa 147th out of 189 countries pa po pala tayo in terms of gender gap.
Please check the number. I think it's 140 something out of 189.
Yes, po, will do. So we proceed to Shar, if you may add on what Dr. Junice mentioned.
So sa Lilak, we really don't not believe, but we're syempre skeptical about this kind of world rankings and studies kasi sa indigenous communities, hindi nga sila nasasama minsan sa census. So there are communities na hindi na nararating talaga ng government. So we're having a hard time believing, not believing, but when we really talked about it, when we talked about women, laging tinatanong syempre, kasama ba dyan ang indigenous women? Kasi most of the time hindi. So yun yung question. And pagdating naman sa mainstreaming gender, sa policies, I really agree with what Doc Junice said. This is a structural issue. This is an issue of power. So it's not something that can be solved by by making a certain project gender sensitive. This is we're talking about a larger power difference here. We're talking about economic framework, the way we view natural resources. We view it as something that we can exploit, and that's something that we can profit from. Ganun natin siya tinitignan. So this is a really hindi siya madaling paano ba ilagay o hindi siya madaling tignan in a very na masikip na or very limited na pagtingin. This is really big. This is bigger than just local government policies or consultation, which brings me to what I wanted to say din kanina. So good na sinabi ni Miss Liz kanina na we consult Indigenous peoples pagdating sa mga development projects natin. But then we need to recognize na Indigenous peoples, meron silang karapatan sa ancestral domain nila, sa ancestral lands nila. They have that right to say no. Hindi kayo pwede pumasok dito. Whatever you want to do, kahit tingin nyo na makakabuti yan sa amin, if we say no, then no. Hindi pwede. So that we need to recognize that, we need to honor that right. Karapatan nila yan eh. So I remember naglabas ng statement Secretary ng Department of Agriculture, sabi niya, we need to develop idle lands of Indigenous people para maboost ang ating food production, hindi magutom ang mga Pilipino. Idle lands, he called ancestral lands idle lands. As if ang value nila ay maging productive, or hindi sila productive in the first place. So, apart from consultation, I mean, yes, we can consult them. Kailangan natin i-honor yung proseso, yung free, prior, and informed consent, FPIC process pagdating sa ancestral lands. Na sa mga development projects katulad ng Kaliwa Dam, for example, hindi ito ginagawa ng maayos ng gobyerno natin. Maraming issues dito, no? So yun, pagdating sa Indigenous communities. And yun, naalala ko yung sinabi kanina rin ni Doc Junice, gusto lang ba natin na are we content with just creating policies and then waiting for these policies to trickle down to our communities to better their communities to better their lives? Baka mas maganda na we go beyond that. So sa Lilak, pagdating sa mga ganitong usapin, we really stand by sa aming calls na itigil na ang extractive industry sa Pilipinas. So isa sa mga calls sa hanay ng Alyansa Tigil Mina ay i-repeal ang Anti-Mining Act ng 1995, ipasa ang Alternative Minerals Management Bill, no? Seek accountability sa corporations na because they were the ones who really did so much damage sa ating sa kalikasan, and really worsened climate change. So we seek accountability from them, and we recognize the rights of Indigenous people to their ancestral domains, to their ancestral lands. Sa kanila yan eh. We honor the FPIC process. We make sure na Indigenous women are in leadership positions, because they are the ones who know, nakatali sila sa natural resources. Kasi sila yung food providers, malapit sila sa gubat, malapit sila sa taniman, malapit sila sa tubig. So they need to have a voice in decision making, no, na madalas wala. So we make sure na yung mga katutubong kababaihan ay nasa key leadership positions, na meron silang, na mapapakinggan sila, at hindi lang basta mapapakinggan, no, talagang merong mangyayari kapag nagsalita sila. So, and then lastly, siguro protect Indigenous women environmental human rights defenders. I know we're talking about policies, pero I think we should also talk about yung killings na nangyayari perpetrated by the Duterte administration. Ilang aktivista na yung namatay, no? Sorry if I'm talking too much or lagpas na sa time, just stop me when you want to. Pero yung ito sa mga una na pinatay when Duterte was appointed to presidency was an environmental human rights defender, a woman, si Judy Capion. And then yung dalawa, yung unang kung tawagin, no, ay nasampulan ng Anti-Terrorism Act. They were Aita. And then land conflict then, they were indigenous people. And then recently, Bloody Sunday, dalawang dumagat, pinatay, kasama sa mga pinatay. And of course, they were struggling against Kaliwadam. So these are environmental human rights defenders being killed. Because when we talked about climate change, we talked about policies. We need to recognize na, pinapatay na yung mga nakikipaglaban, no, para sa karapatan ng lupa, karapatan ng kalikasan. And so yun, I think importante lang na ma-bring up din siya today.
Yes, Star. Thank you for highlighting the need not just to recognize and honor the rights of our indigenous peoples as well as their defenders. So let's now go to Lisse. Ano yung gaps na nakikita mo in terms of gender equality, especially in your community?
Yes, thank you. Actually, I agree so much with Shar. Before ako mag-share about my personal experiences, I would just like to highlight what she said about informed consent. Kasi isa talaga yan sa ethical issues when it comes to research. And as a nagre-research right now for my thesis, it's really important to have informed consent kasi isa yan sa mga nagiging ethical dilemma during ethnographic research. When we say ethnographic, karamihan yan when you go to indigenous communities. And to think na may ethical issues na pwedeng mangyari during research, what more during policy making and project developments concerning ancestral lands. And that might affect these indigenous communities. So really important talaga ang informed consent. As for the gap, I believe hindi. When you say that lumiit na talaga yung gap and felt na talaga siya, maybe you're looking at a privileged perspective. Kasi for me, first of all, I agree with Doc Junice, no? Who are we talking here? Women, okay, define. The statistics, the population, women. Do we include the trans women or are we talking about the cis women or the biological women? First of all, we need to parang dissect, no, the statistics talaga. And the population, when it comes to the population, are the marginalized sectors represented well in this statistics? So yun yung mga concerns ko about the statistics. And I agree with Doc Junice that we have to be careful when it comes to doing sampling and getting samples, population samples, because we need to really consider representing a lot, as many sectors as we can, especially the marginalized. And as for my community, I believe actually for me, national level mas felt nga yung gap when it comes to when it comes to issues. Like for example, share ko lang, concrete example siguro na nakikita ko ay yung pandemic response. Kasi the military are the ones taking in charge and most of the members of the IATF are men. So in March 20, no, meron akong data, si President Rodrigo Duterte, inappoint niya si Presidential Peace Advisor Carlito Galvez, retired military man, as the country's national policy chief implementer against COVID-19. So, aside from the fact that the military is the one taking over a health crisis, it should be all noted that the lack of women members in the IATF did not help in forwarding gender-responsive strategies and health guidelines and protocols. So except for Tourism Secretary Bernadette Romulo Puyat and Education Secretary Leonor Briones, women are underrepresented in the cabinet and virtually voiceless. So right from the beginning, the Duterte administration actually kind of perpetuated a wide gender gap in decision making. So I believe that the gender gap when it comes to industry and I agree with Shar na power, it's really a, a problem. It's really a talk of power relations. Uh, and yung sinabi ko nga kanina na merong unemployment, mas mataas na unemployment rate for women compared with men as the data of the uh, shows. Kasi the industries where women are well represented, yun yung naapektuhan ng sobra ng migrate natin from physical to online work from home. And sobrang nakakalungkot lang. Sa community naman namin as SK committee head, actually sobrang hirap kasi yung mobility mo to actually go around and take surveys. I don't really want to endanger the lives of the people by interacting more with a lot often with them kasi sobrang limited ng mobility. And actually I'm thankful na meron akong privilege of accessing the internet and taking part in activities like this and organizing webinars. Pero medyo nasasad lang ako kasi I know there are a lot of people who don't have access to internet. And isa nga yun sa problema natin when it comes to remote learning. Like for example, dito sa community namin, maraming may problem with lack of gadgets for remote learning. So nagsusurvey kami right now kung anong mga kailangan ng mga estudyante, school supplies, kung may kailangan na ba talagang urgent ng laptop, and kung meron bang walang access sa internet. So ang ginawa namin, nagtayo kami bumili kami ng parang, hindi bumili, nagpakabit na lang kami ng internet sa may barangay hall. And then bumili din kami ng isang set ng desktop with the monitor and the keyboard and printer and everything. Pero yun nga, hindi pa rin maaalis yung fact na merong gap when it comes to access to information. And may iba talaga na mas privileged when it comes to informing themselves, especially in this situation na online learning kasi merong mga kabataan, unfortunately, na walang access sa information. So hindi sila, nung nagkaroon ng pandemic, kung dati hindi sila masyadong napipigyan ng privilege to inform themselves, ngayon mas hirap sila to give themselves access to those kinds of information. And isa na yung usapin about climate change sa mga dapat pag-usapan na medyo hindi na elaborate dahil nga merong gap when it comes to technical access. And yun, I'm hoping na as SK committee head, I can work and I can contribute and I can help the SK Council to address this issue para hindi lang para sa academic purposes as in sa schools, pero to actually to widen the reach ng mga webinars namin sa darating na activities that also include talks about climate change and how urgent climate, environmental, sanitary, and gender-related issues are. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. So our discussion was very enriching and just so eye-opening. And we just need to look more into informed consent. We need to include more indigenous women in decision making because it's value adding. And there's just so much more pala that we need to do to achieve equity, like well-rounded equity. So at this point, we'd like to gain a perspective from Ms. Jean. So how do you feel about the country's progress in trying to mainstream gender concerns in our climate policy, governance, and finance? So we have the Magna Carta for women. in 2019, the Climate Change Commission also issued a resolution mainstreaming and strengthening gender-responsive approaches in the formulation and implementation of climate change policies and programs. Can you tell us more about these policies? And yeah.
Thank you, Ivana. So, yeah, the Climate Change Commission has that resolution on gender mainstreaming and climate change actions, both adaptation and mitigation. And again, we are in coordination and in collaboration, of course, with the Philippine Commission on Women, which helps us in developing guidelines and policies towards the mainstreaming. So, at least for the CCC, no, I can say as I observed in my past 5 years of experience in this agency that hindi natin hinahayaan that the policy remains a policy. It's a problem kasi in the government, diba? Some would say we have that policy but we're not really implementing it or executing it. But in the CCC we use it. We practice it first internally. So if when we say we had that resolution, we are obliged to follow into that framework or whatever man yung guidelines that the Climate Change Commission has set for its at least own practice at first. And then, of course, as we go down to local government units, as we talk to our advisory boards, which are also interagencies with our partners, non-government and private sector, we share these experiences and then we get then insights from them to improve our guidelines. So that's what I also mean when we say consultative and very participative approach. Yun lang, no, we really have to be careful then when we say kasi consultative. I think some of the other speakers have also pointed it out that when we say consultative kasi, this is from my planning lectures and in college na when you say consultative, yes, I consulted you, but nasa akin pa rin yung decision if I will follow that or if I will consider that. And that's something that we really need to look into then right now. So, yeah, I can't speak, of course, for the whole government, like for other agencies, if when they say that they consider a consultative methodology in crafting policies and programs, they use it kung ano yung resulta ng consultations. But in the CCC, yes, we do it science and evidence-based. We get as much data as we can, and ang daming people from different fields inside the commission working towards parang one goal, that's towards climate resilience ng Philippines, and we take different perspectives. So that's very important. Siguro that's a practice that maybe I can say that talagang ginagawa in CCC and something that other agencies can also consider in their own methodologies naman. So we don't want it to remain as a policy. So that resolution, may mga babies na siya. Kumbaga, meron na tayong mga guidelines. We submit our gender evaluation framework na chine-check din regularly by PCW. In our own review toolkits, for example, in our own handbooks, we have that. In fact, in the CCC, hindi na pag-iiwanan yung gender. We always treat it as really cross-cutting and lahat ng issues nakakonect yung gender. For example, in each of the programs that we have, meron talagang we need to make sure that gender is included in the scope, that we also look into that. So capacity development wise, alam niyo yun, as simple as when you invite people to attend a webinar or a training, we make sure na may equal representations because we do not want na talagang nakikita natin na we have this, we want to mainstream, we want to empower women, but we don't really target them as our audience. So as simple as that, kasama yan. Of course, in policies. So pababa siya. When you start with policies, then you have the programs and then the projects and then the activities it's included. So siguro that's one thing that others can also consider. Para naman hindi natin hayaan na we have policies but we're not really implementing or executing this.
Yes, and just to add on what Jean said, critical din yung roles ng Philippine Commission on Women and NCIP on the evaluation of GCF proposals as members of the Interagency Technical Working Group. Hindi po kami nag-endorse ng GCF proposals unless may endorsement ng dalawang agencies na ito. So thank you, Jean. And clearly, marami pa tayong dapat trabahuin ukol dito sa CCC and maging sa ibang national government agencies. Nevertheless, we now have good policies in place. We have the Magna Carta for Women, the Climate Change Act, and the resolution adopted by CCC on gender. So we'd like to ask all our guests, apart from what you have already shared earlier, what policies and measures should we further develop to help women in vulnerable communities become more resilient to the challenges of climate change? Are there initiatives that you are doing now in your respective organizations that must be institutionalized and scaled up? So let's start po with Dr. Junice.
Yeah, let me just start off with my comments on how thoroughgoing is our gender analysis, no? Because you're supposed to do that for all fields, for all, I think, departments, no? And I can speak of, for example, sa health, because that's what I know best. There is no thoroughgoing gender analysis in health. So there is vow, but vow is like a justice question. We don't have gender-based violence. For example, how do health people address gender-based violence? Wala nga, di ba? Yung parang we don't have that sa primary setting. Dapat may gender, may identifying the gender roles, the status, etc., the power, di ba? Walang power dynamics. So also maybe you can talk about your sector and you're satisfied with the gender analysis. Coming from the health, I need to see that. Kasi sa health, ang analysis lang doon ay gender, ay violence, o gender ay sexual orientation. Halimbawa, maternity. Maternity, matindi ang gender dyan. Like for example, ano yung role ng babae? Ano yung concepts natin on virility and the right of women to parang express themselves in a relationship? Those are gender issues. But those are not specifically tackled by gender analytic frames that I've seen, no? So I think baka tingnan din natin, baka mamaya nandun lang tayo sa gender disaggregated na, ilan bang lalaki dito? Ilan ba ang babae dito? But if you don't look at the gender dynamics, baka you're missing a lot of things, no? So, and this is very critical for marginalized people kasi yung intersectionalities of gender in the different gender sa loob ng indigenous, kasi alam nga natin yan, may hierarchy din dyan. So even I think we have to, when we talk about marginalized peoples, I don't think there's any, I haven't seen of any gender analysis within sa people with disability. Wala akong nakikitang ganun. LGBT, parang it's assumed na ay pareho lang naman yan, ang ano naman yan, puro sexual difference, so sexual orientation, but there's power differences even between gay groups and lesbian groups. So baka yun but that's a project for all of us, because when we talk about gender analysis, it's not easy to do, di ba? So yun yung comments ko, kasi madaling magsabi ng mainstreaming. And we have had mainstreaming since the 80s or 90s. And sa amin, for example, how come maternal mortality is still low? O maternity, saan yung gender dyan? Saan yung pagpa-prioritize yung women na hindi sila namamatay sa isang very, very preventable death? Di ba? Dapat walang nang namamatay sa pagbubuntis. So I think, I'm just questioning how thorough the gender analysis is, and are we linking it to rights? Kasi eventually ang rights will say medyo may inequity dito ng power at saka resources. Kailangan, di ba? Government responsibility is to check, to make sure that funding resources go to correct inequity. So yung parang baka that's something that we can all do, and maybe when I connect it with climate justice action, I'm very happy to see electric cars, LGUs, di ba? Ang daming commitments, ang daming NGO commitments talaga, no? Daming mga activist NGOs talagang putting their lives on the line. But we need strong articulation from national leadership, di ba? Kasi ito yung mamumuno, ito yung magbibigay ng resources, etc. And maybe that's why I'm so sorry if I'm not helping you. Parang put forward ideas of paano na, how do we go forward, because I don't think you can go forward without a gender responsive leadership at a national level. Lahat ng ginagawa natin na ito, parang ginagawa natin maliliit-liit-liit. We don't even know how long they will, if they can be sustained at all, no? Kasi, but national government really has a part. And yun na nga, I have no solution, but I think we really need to keep on searching for a national leadership that has a gender eye, that has climate eye. I'm sure we will be blessed with one such leader soon. So I think that's just to make sure that I don't cloud all your, baka you have been feeling negative because of my interventions, but really, yeah, I continue to be hopeful. And I know that there have been policies here and there, but we need a systematic, overarching, coordinated framework that ties up together all yung ating different, no, where we're coming from different places. But when you talk about rights and empowerment, I think isa lang yan. And that's what I'm looking forward. And that's what I know we are strong at, no? So, baka yun, pwede nating magamit talaga yung ating, yung ating pinakaalam sa lahat.
Yes, we have to do more stuff like this. Okay, let's have a share your thoughts, please.
Yun din, nainisip ko rin when we're talking about policies. But then, kapag tumitingin tayo sa national government natin, sa ating presidente na very anti-women, it's really hard to think ano pa kaya mga polisiya ang pwede nating ipatupad with this kind of government, no? With this kind of leader na hindi pa siya presidente, alam na natin na napaka-misogynist. At nung umupo siya sa pwesto, maraming na-embolden ng misogyny, yung mapakita nila yung misogyny nila. So that's the kind of leadership that we have right now. So I don't know how far we can go when we talked about policies, when this is the kind of government that we have, the kind of leaders that we have. Katulad ng sinabi ko kanina, to really help women, or mitigate climate change, kailangan natin, of course, kailangan natin ng leaders na feminists. Hindi yung current leaders natin yan, but also leaders who don't think to exploit our natural resources, or who don't think to take lands or ancestral lands from indigenous people. So again, yung call ng Lilak sa hanin ng Alyansa Tigil-Nina at iba't ibang environment groups din, I'm sure, itigil na yung extractive industry, papanirang pagmimina sa bansa, ipasa na yung Alternative Minerals Management Bill, i-honor, i-recognize yung karapatan ng mga katutubo sa lupaing ninuno nila, sa ancestral domains and ancestral lands nila. Kanina na-mention yung NCIP. Siguro, it's worth mentioning, meron tayong mga policies really that protect indigenous people, like E3, and of course, yung FPIC process natin. But then you have real cases such as the Kaliwadam, no? Na 5 out of 6 clusters na yung nag-no sa Kaliwadam, and yet hindi pa rin naglalabas ang NCIP ng kasulatan na nag-no na yung community. Wala pa rin ganon. Pinipilit pa rin nila pumasok dun sa indigenous, sa ancestral lands ng mga dumagat. So yun, we have the policies, but are they being respected? Hindi. We have the rights, but hindi siya nirerespeto ng gobyerno natin. And in relation sa next na nagsuot sana na call, no? Protect indigenous women, environmental, human rights defenders. Protektahan natin yung mga nagdidepensa pa ng ating kalikasan, ng ating mga karapatang pantao. Kasi yun na bukod sa hindi na nirerespeto ng gobyerno yung karapatang pantao, sila pa yung perpetrator, sila pa yung unang lumalabag sa karapatang pantao natin. So when we're talking about climate change, extractive industry, mga corporations, like yung kwento ko kanina, kasama nila yung Philippine National Police mismo, kasama ng mining company na pumasok dun sa community. You have military sa mga areas na merong ongoing development projects, plantations, may mga private armies, yung mga plantations natin, or they work with the military. I'm saying this like, then again, yung sinabi natin kanina, no, when we talked about climate change, we talked about we talked about this. We talked about women vulnerable in climate change. We really need to open our eyes, open our eyes. We need to talk about the killings, the threats, because these are very real. Mahirap siyang panoorin, minsan gusto na lang natin isipin na hindi. Parang minsan nagpa-flight ako pag gano'n na nangyayari ba talaga to, totoo ba to? But they're happening, they're very real. So yun. And again, these are big power changes, structural issues that we need to work on. So I can stop there.
Yes, Shar, thank you. Tama ka nga na hindi lang policies ang dapat tingnan natin, but the implementation mismo of these policies. So let's go to Lisse. Bilang member ng Barangay Council, who could also develop policies and measures, what are your thoughts on this?
Yes, currently, meron kaming mga projects for environmental and climate and mitigation and adaptation, no? And I think I agree with the other guests that recognizing the important contributions of women as decision makers, stakeholders, educators, career experts, leaders across all sectors can lead to successful long-term solutions to climate change. And yun nga, as an SK councilor who's heading the environmental committee, I would like to forward more projects. And yeah, to be honest, sometimes meron talagang nangyayaring gap and oppression when it comes to policy making and when it comes to the prioritization of projects. Kasi hindi masyadong napaprioritize yung environmental projects here in my community. And I want to work on that. We can do something about that. I'm currently working on that. And when it comes to naman, minsan hindi naman sa pero nafe-feel ko rin talaga yung hirap, struggles of being a woman in the government, even as young as my age, kahit youth, SK level pa lang yung position ko. But I can feel na meron talagang gap pa rin between men and women and all genders when it comes to these issues and when it comes to holding a position. And I'm just being honest, like honest experience lang. It's just, I don't know, maybe it's just me. Pero ayun nga, I think we should recognize the important contributions of women, especially when it comes to climate justice. Kasi sobrang malaki talagang magagawa ng mga kababaihan for the environment and for climate justice.
Yes, actually, these are all very important, and then these are things that we should definitely be working on. That's why empowerment is such an important thing, so we can drive ourselves to move forward and create the change that we need. So now we're going to ask Jean, based on what the other speakers have said, how can the Climate Change Commission and the whole government support these policy? Oh, sorry. Okay. Okay, sorry. Thank you. So I'd like to thank our guests again for making this episode thought-provoking and meaningful. I know that our climate reality leaders have learned much about gender-responsive climate action from these stories. Oh, wait, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry.
I think
Okay.
Ivana is asking Jean on how the government could support these policy recommendations.
Okay. Thanks, Laika and Ivana. If we really want to address this issue, we have the policies. But I think, like what we do in climate change concerns, we need to look into ano ba yung pinag-uugatan ng issue. So, for example, and how of course we'll be able to understand and move forward from this. We start first with in climate change, no, in addressing the impacts of climate change. We start with risk and vulnerability assessments, and I would like to compare that system into how we really integrate gender in our action. So that's very important. The first one, of course, the one mentioned by Dr. Junice, that we need to really improve the manner of putting that gender analysis and integrating the results of this kind of analysis in the policies and programs. And then talking about policies, I don't think we need new policies. We need instead we need to evolve our policies, make it more again adaptive and flexible. Ano ba yung mga bago ngayon? Baka kailangan lang natin siyang i-update. And by means of updating, of course, we need to undertake review. We need to review our policies. We need to check its implementation. Are this being implemented properly and in accordance to the law? And for example, if you look at the Mining Act, kailan pa ba siya ginawa? Is it still valid up to this date with all the changes in the environment, with all the conversion of lands happening, the conversion of land use? We need to all consider those changes. Kasi hindi tayo pwedeng lagi nagbabangko na policy that has been crafted like 2 decades ago. Kasi yung basis ng policy na yon baka wala na, baka iba na. And that's something that we need to update. So new policies, siguro not at this point that we need new policies, because first we need to undertake review all the policies related to climate change, related to gender, regarding all the rights of human, of indigenous peoples. And then we start from that. We apply ano yung result of gender analysis, risk and vulnerability assessments, and other societal concerns, economic concerns. Pagsamasamahin natin yan, i-integrate natin siya into one, and then we update, and that will sort of become the new policies applicable at the contemporary time. So I think that's something that we can do. And at least, at least we can assure that all the viewers here, all the attendees here, that in the CCC, that's something that we do. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. It's all there, no? Kailangan lang natin siyang ayusin pa. And of course, hindi porke nag-aantay tayo for government to update and review these processes. Of course, we all need to move, to keep talking, to keep moving. All the young people out there, of course, yun nga baka kasi na masyado tayo na-discourage because we are young women, young and women nag-work in the government. I think that's something that we really need to consider as an inspiration. So silly, yan, not because you're young, you can't do anything. Of course, we are trying our best. Yun lang. Let's help each other. I think that's one way of empowering. We empower each woman out there, working towards climate change resilience, towards defending our human rights and environmental and climate change defenders. You don't like that, of course, na sila yung at stake because sila yung katulong natin on the ground. So yeah, I think Laika can also agree or add something to that. But I think that's based on my observation and of course in response to the recommendations and concerns raised by my co-panel.
Yes, thank you, Jean, and thank you for all our speakers for your insights. These suggestions are indeed very much appreciated for our work in the CCC. And sinabi nga ni Jean, we do hope, of course, na lahat tayo ay patuloy na isusulong ang karapatan and welfare ng kababaihan sa gitna ng krisis sa klima, maging ngayon sa pandemya.
Yes, like us. So especially in us youth, we have greater potential and energy in leading the charge for these reforms that we want to see today. And we, of course, are very thankful to all of our speakers for your stories and the discussions we had today. Your stories and perspectives helped us understand the intersection of gender rights, poverty alleviation, and climate action. And these will be very helpful as we carry on our initiatives for our fellow women, the climate, and our planet. But before we wrap up the discussions, we would like to ask our guests this last question. What are the things that make you feel hopeful in our fight for gender equality, women empowerment, and gender responsive climate action? So we'll keep it to 1 to 2 sentences each, and we'll start with Ms. Jean. So Ms. Jean.
Right. What makes me hopeful, no? It's seeing people, women specifically, like you, those attending this event, kayo, Ivana, Laika, si Ms. Naz, and all the co-panelists, na very optimistic to bring about change in the country, not just on climate change issues, but all the economic and societal concerns and issues that are affecting the whole of nation, all the communities, again, the marginalized communities in specific.
Thank you, Jean. How about you, Dr. Junice? What are your hopes moving forward?
Well, my hope really is parang we go from, I know projects are very important because they provide concrete relief, no, and welfare, but I think we have to go beyond projects to movements. Strengthening movements are interconnections. Kasi movements yung nag-a-attack ng power ng power inequalities, di ba? Sometimes, as you said, especially in government, it's really hard to address inequality, inequity in government. But movements can do that. And I think ang maganda sa atin talaga ay may tradition tayo of movements. At alam natin in patches, yung parang buhay na buhay yung climate change, di ba? Yung climate justice, buhay na buhay yung women. And I think we just need to come together para dito. We haven't been coming together, but this is one. So I would like to congratulate this effort because I think we all need to parang link arms on the issue of climate justice, no, climate action.
Yes, thank you both. How about Shar?
This gives me, this gathering gives me a lot of hope. I think, gusto ko lang echo din yung sinabi ni Doc Junice and ni Miss Jean. Yung pag nakikita natin yung intersectionalities ng mga issues natin, pagkakapare-pareho, and then as we actually coming together, that gives me a lot of hope. Kasi I think it's, even with Indigenous, with Lilak's Indigenous women partners, importante sa kanila din na naririnig na may kakampi sila, may kasama sila dito. So I think, especially now with the pandemic, with everything, it's important that we don't feel alone in this.
Thank you, Shar. And lastly, Lise, may we hear from you?
Yes. After attending this event, I became even more hopeful because seeing and hearing from my fellow women leaders na nasa CCC and yung iba meron ding ano sa government, and it's really it really gives me hope na parang mag-push pa ng advocacies and to na kahit merong difficulties and struggles as an SK, as a woman who is holding a position in the government, it gives me the strength to move forward and to always keep my passion for climate justice burning. Thank you.
Yes, very true, love. So thank you very much again to all of our guests. We learned so much from you today. I know that our climate reality leaders have learned much about gender responsive climate action from the stories that you shared today. I hope that this Klimatotohanan episode inspires our viewers to advocate for fair and more equitable approaches to climate action. So in the spirit of story sharing, we invite our viewers to comment on Facebook or in our Zoom chat pledges that you'd like to make to further gender responsive climate action.
Thank you, Ivana. We will speak with our guests again in a little bit. But now, let's go to the Artivism segment of our show, where we provide spaces for climate reality leaders and friends in the climate change movement to share their poems, performance pieces, and other climate-related creations in relation to the topic of the show. Pero hindi po ako kakanta ngayon. Today, we are very fortunate because our guests themselves have agreed to share their art with us. We also have with us our fellow climate reality leader, Ms. Padma Perez of Agam Agenda, who will be moderating this segment. Over to you, Ms. Padma.
Hi, thank you, Laika. Magandang hapon sa lahat ng mga Pinoy climate reality leaders na nanonood ngayon. At syempre sa ating mga guest speakers, salamat sa inyong mga binahaging kwento tungkol sa kababaihan sa panahon ng krisis sa klima at COVID-19. Ipapasok naman natin sa diskusyon ang tula, musika, sayaw, at video. Bukas nga pala, it's World Poetry Day and World Forests Day. So ano nga ba ang saysay ng sining sa pagtugon sa climate crisis? Habang pinag-iisipan nyo yung mga pledges nyo for women's rights during the climate crisis, you might also have some answers to this. What's the relevance or what's the place of poetry and art in the climate crisis? What's its role? Kung may sagot kayo, you may also drop your comments sa FB Live or sa chat box sa Zoom. Or if you're a Pinoy climate reality leader who's a visual artist, singer, songwriter, poet, actor, spoken word artist, musician, or if you have any hidden artistic skills and talents, we'd love to meet you. We'd love to feature your work here and learn about your artivism in relation to the climate crisis. This segment is for you. So come forward, reach out, and shine, okay? So now, si Dr. Junice has graciously agreed to read poetry with us CRLs today. She will be reading the poem Legacy by Eileen Casineto. Eileen Casineto is an example of an artivist who works with and for her community. She's the poet laureate of San Mateo County in California in the United States. And she's the first Asian American and Filipino-born poet appointed to this post. So malaking karangalan yon para kay Eileen at para sa atin na rin. She's also the curator of Power to the Poets, a reading series on poetry, solidarity, and social justice. Bilang poet laureate, she has worked with local government agencies and nonprofits to amplify the role of poetry in public discourse. She also facilitates youth poetry workshops, advocates the creation of youth poet laureate programs in the county, co-organizes youth poetry competitions, and offers free one-on-one mentoring sessions for San Mateo County students. So very committed to her and involved in her community. She's also on the board of directors of the Public Library Associates, and she runs her own indie press, Paloma Press. So I'd like to invite Dr. Junice. Please turn your video back on. And we'd love to hear you read the poem Poetry Legacy by Eileen Casineto.
OMG, now I don't know if I can do justice to this poem, but yes,
I'm sure you can.
Yes, just listen to the message because it's really hair tingling, no? It's a very nice message about our lolas. So the title of the poem is Legacy. To tell her story, you must know when to put courage in a matchbox and conceal it in a loaf of bread. You must learn how a message betoken deliverance when courage is simply a word someone wrote on a slip of paper and the sweet scent of bread could no longer sustain you. You must grasp your other hand with what grit remains, growing and unyielding. To tell her story, you must walk in her shoes. If forced out of your leased farmland, don't forget to bring rice if you can pack only what you can carry. And if your mother did not speak inside the bus with the windows covered with brown paper on the way to the barracks, it was only because she was praying that you would not be housed in the horse stall with a manure whitewashed over. And if you were, she was deciding what to do about the smell. To tell her story, you must remember the landscape from behind barbed wire fences. You must gaze at your body and know its history. Look beneath the tender ridged scars and see the bone protruding out of your right arm and hole the size of a football on your right thigh, wondering how the lights never went out. You must look at the image of your grandmother with the weight of rammed earth against what you survived. To tell her story, you must say a prayer not of sorrow, but of grace. You must loosen the earth, pick daffodils through the base of the stem. Remember your roots and ordinary ways, and the grit under your fingernails, the way your grandmother taught you. Salamat. Nako. Yeah,
Salamat po, Dr. Nice. Ang ganda. It was very moving. May portion sa tula na nakakagulat rin kasi parang it's suggesting some violence also and a lot of loss, no?
Yes.
Ano pong nagustuhan niyo sa tulang ito? What did you like about it?
It's a story about many of the women behind men. I know this is a story of torture and incarceration and the power of the power and the grace, I think, of the women behind every man or woman, no, who has been through very I torture talaga ito behind the barracks. And I think it speaks to all of us who have the courage to fight for what we believe in and to sacrifice. And sometimes it's easier to do that because our mothers and our grandmothers were beside us all the time. So it's I love the imagery. I was telling Francis, I so love the message that is not, di ba, hindi siya grim and determined. It's a very grim and determined story, but told in a way that is so ang ganda sa pakiramdam, di ba? The sense.
It's told so lovingly, no?
Yes.
I feel like it's told
grandmother.
with love. Yes, oo. I'm getting goosebumps listening to you describe the poem.
It's
Pero that's the
the
power of poetry.
poem. My goodness, yeah, we need to know
Yeah.
her and to have her more in our sorties, no?
And
Thank
when I
you,
was
thank you,
listening,
Padma. Thank you for this poem, actually.
thank you for sharing it with us and sharing your thoughts about it. And when I was listening to you speak earlier, like about the women who have survived so many disasters and who hold up their families, I felt that this poem could also be about them. Would you agree?
Yes, I think it talks to so many women, if not all women.
And last question about the poem. Do you have a favorite line, or is there a phrase or an image that really grabbed your attention and held you?
I love the last line. The last lines, because it talks about daffodils, flowers that I also love. But then it also juxtaposes the flowers and the grace with grit. I think those are things that women blend together, di ba?
Yeah.
And the courage in a matchbox. Oh my goodness! I think now that you're telling me to go back to it, there's so many lines in here that really touch the heart, no, and really are a joy to express and to read. So I hope we get to see more of her poems, Padma. This is really wonderful.
We can, and you can look her up online. She has a website, and more of her poetry is on that website. She's also published a number of collections of her own poetry, so you can seek her out. Thank you again, Dr. Junice, for sharing with us and showing us how poetry can speak to our work and can also make us feel good, and but also disturb us in a way, I think, so that we feel we need to act and do something. That's one of the strengths, or maybe the magic of poetry. And so thank you po for sharing
It's
that
something
with us.
that we need, Padma, those of us who are task-oriented bastards. We need to have our hearts activated every so often. So thank you for this also.
Thank you. It's medicine for us too. Thank you. Ayun. So maybe listening to Doc Junice and listening to the poem, you also thought of what the significance of art and poetry might be in climate activism, or in feminism as well. And now let's, and if you have any of these thoughts or ideas, again, share naman, drop them in the comments in FB Live, or drop them in the chat box on Zoom. And now I'd like to invite Shar to share with us a short video of the Tayaw and Gopa of the Tuwali and Ifugao women. So Shar, are you still with us? Before we watch the video, could you introduce it to us briefly? Where was this taken? And who is in it? Ayun, when and what's happening in the video before we see it.
So, yung video ay kinuha namin nung Women's Day, International Women's Day last year, 2020. Pero actually March 6 or March 7, I think ito, yung date. Yun yung huling beses na nakalabas kami. Lilak, huling beses na nakapunta kami sa community. Kasi taon-taon, every Women's Month, pumupunta ang Lilak pupunta ang Lilak sa community, no, para dun mismo mag-celebrate. Yung punta ay sa Didipio, sa mga Tuwali Indigenous women. Ito yung pinrepair nila, so sila mismo yung gumawa rin ng programa. Ito yung naisip nila para sa aming celebration. So, Tayaw ay isang traditional dance ng mga Tuwali. Meron siyang 3 movements, no? Each movement ay nagre-represent ng iba't ibang bagay. So yung unang movement ay unity, pangalawa ay power, pangatlo ay freedom. So and then after nung tayaw, meron ding gopa. So ang gopa naman ay isang chant na hindi lahat sa community ay nakakagawa. So and mga elders sa community yung may capacity maggopa o mag-chant. Kasi ito ay stories, no? So, 2 storya ito na interwoven. So, kwento ito ng kanilang nakaraan, no? Dekada na struggle laban sa mapaninang pagmimina sa Didipio. At ito rin ay kwento ng hinaharap kasi yung future na finally makalaya na sila sa mapanirang pagmimina sa komunidad nila. So, kaya gusto ko rin to i-share, very significant. Sa akin kasi, miss ko na sila. 1 taon na simula nung nakita ko sila. Kaya sana magustuhan niyo rin. Napakaikli lang ng video, hindi ko na videohan ng isang diretso eh. Pero sana ma-appreciate pa rin natin.
Okay, salamat for that background, Shar. Let's watch the video, and then Shar, let's come back to talk about it a little more after watching the video. Ito siya. Okay, thank you. So, Shar, what were you feeling or thinking when you were there and naggagangsa sila and they were dancing? Yun muna. Dami kong tanong, pero yun muna.
Um, Feeling na ang dami kong nararamdaman nun kasi siguro pangalawa ko pa lang yon napunta sa community. Bagong-bago pa ako sa Lilak. Well, hindi naman bago-bago, pero bago lang talaga kasi naman ako nung panahon na yun. So, um, iba't ibang nararamdaman ko nun. Pero masaya kasi napaka lakas ba na napaka-inspiring ng grupo, no. Ang pangalan po ng grupo nila ay Bileg Dagiti Babae, o ang translation sa Tagalog ay Lakas ng Kababaihan. Sila yung all women, all indigenous women na group na lumalaban sa mina sa community. And pagdating namin, pumunta kami sa mataas na lugar. Kung kilala po natin si Miss Judy, no, kasamahan natin sa Lilak, may hinahanap siya na bundok. Sabi niya, nasaan na yung bundok na to? Di ba meron ito dati? Kasi matagal na rin nung huling beses siya nakapunta sa community. Sabi nila, ayan na, yan na yun. Tapos kung makikita niyo yung ilalim na, hindi na siya ganun na, ilalim na siya na, nahukay na siya ng mina.
Dahil sa
ganun,
mining.
dahil sa mining, ganun yung itsura ng pagmimina nila. Pero, and yet, ganito pa rin.
Pagmimina ng Oceana.
Pagmimina ng Oceana, sorry, not the community. So, mixed feelings, pero mostly strengthened. Sobrang na-strengthen ako ng experience, or hindi experience, ng coming together na to, ng celebration na to.
Oh, ang ganda, no? Kasi lumaki din ako sa Baguio tsaka sa Cordy. So, yung pakiramdam ba na yung tunog ng gangsa, parang nagbibigay lakas. Tapos nararamdaman mo dito, di ba? Na-experience mo yon. Sumayaw ka din ba?
Ay, mas nag-video. Pero ganun nga po na talagang ini-invite nila lahat sumama at sumayaw. So, talagang masaya rin kami nung pumunta kami.
Tapos yung part na yung auntie, she stood in the middle, tapos parang nag-orate siya. Yun yung gopa, tama ba?
Yun po yung gopa. So yun, I think may nagtatanong din sa FB, yun nga ay kwento ng tuwali ng indigenous community nila, kwento ng kanilang struggle. So decades long struggle against mining, and ng kanilang pangarap na kinabukasan na finally malaya na sila sa pagmimina.
Okay, and gaya ng sinabi mo kanina, it's not just anybody who can do that. So she must be an elder or a respected leader in the community, correct?
Yeah. Apa.
Galing. Tapos, ano yung, pakiulit lang ulit, what was the occasion for this? Kasi usually yung mga community dance is related to a wedding or a big celebration. So ano yung significance ng tayaw na ito?
Ito po ay celebration namin ng Women's Day. So, pumunta kami, yun nga, taon-taon pumupunta po ang Lilak sa community para dun mag-celebrate ng Women's Day. Last year, yung huling beses na nakalabas kami, kasi hindi na pwede ngayon, gawa ng COVID. Ang huli naming napuntahan po talaga ay Didipio. So ito ay celebration ng International Women's Day and Women's Month.
Ang ganda, no? And thank you for sharing this with us. Kasi hindi karaniwan na nakikita natin ang mga to, lalo na kung nandito lang tayo sa Maynila. At napakaganda ng link niya sa issue sa bundok na nawala, sa mining, sa matagal na struggle ng mga katutubo na nagbibigay lakas pa rin yung mga sayaw. And I'm glad that you showed us that link, no, between the struggle for ancestral domains and territory and indigenous rights and the art also. Kasi minsan, pag tinanong mo yung tao about ano yung naiisip nila pag sinabi yung katutubo, palaging sayaw, damit, kanta, pero hindi hindi alam ng karaniwang tao na nakakabit lahat ng yon, nakakabit sa kultura, sa kaalaman at saka sa mga issue at sa tunay na struggle na matagal nang tinatahak ng mga katutubo. So maraming salamat, Shar, for that video, at sana magkaroon pa tayo ng maraming pagkakataon tulad nito. Thank you, Shar. Okay, so once again, yayain ko lang mga Pinoy climate reality leaders, share your creative works, shine your light for all to see. So write to the Climate Reality Project Philippines on FB or IG or Twitter. PM is the key. We would love to feature you and your work in this artivism segment of Klimatotohanan with the Agam agenda. Let's reimagine the climate crisis and our collective futures through stories and art. Over to you, Ivana.
Thank you, Ms. Padma, and thank you to the Agam Agenda and our guests for sharing these beautiful artivism pieces. Okay, so before we end, we have a quick fire mini game. So we'll be flashing quotes on the screen, and then all you have to do is tell us whether the quotes make you feel empowered or disempowered. Then very briefly, maybe in just 1 or 2 sentences, tell us why you feel that way.
We'll do one quote each for our guest speakers, and our audience is encouraged to play the game by using the reaction buttons and typing down your responses in the chat box.
Okay, so it's like this long. Here's a sample. Quote, Laika is a beautiful being. Response.
Empowered, syempre. Yes, I feel that way because totoo naman bawal kumontra. Yes, the game goes like this. First, let's have Jean respond to this quote by Joanne Carling. People are not sitting down. People are taking action, and women are at the forefront of these actions. Jean?
Of course, I feel empowered because that's who we are. Yan yung ginagawa natin now. So, women at the forefront of these actions.
Yes, thank you. Okay, now a quote by Hilary Tam for Dr. Junice. We should change the narrative from one of fear and despair despite the bad climate news. People are still very optimistic. Optimism is essential because hope beats fear every time. Dr. Junice?
Yes, that's all I have. Hope. And I think hope will eventually triumph. No? So I am for this. Yeah, I love this.
Okay, this one is for Shar, a quote by Amina Mohammed. Let's amplify all women's voices, from our communities to global climate talks. Together, we are stronger and will go further.
Yes, very
Shar?
empowered. Hello. Yeah, I feel very empowered from this quote and also strengthened. Talagang kailangan nating magsama-sama, no?
Yes, thank you, Shar. And then lastly, a quote by Patricia Espinosa for Lisse. Don't underestimate the power of what you say. You have it in you to be a climate leader.
Yes, I feel empowered. So empowering as someone in the youth council. I know that sometimes I may be insecure because I feel like I'm still young. I don't have experience yet. But yeah, this quote is empowering because despite my age and despite gender, despite me being a woman, I will continue advocating for whatever cause I believe in, especially climate justice.
Thank you, Lise. Yes, it's powerful indeed. So there we have it. Again, big thank yous to our lovely guests, Jean, Dr. Junice, Shar, and Lise. Thank you for staying kahit po overtime. And indeed, there is an immense amount of work to be done to achieve women empowerment in vulnerable communities. Let us continue to work together to ensure a future of progression and positive change.
I couldn't agree more, Laika. In addition to our guests, we'd also like to thank the Klimatotohanan production team, our climate reality leaders, and all of you who've tuned in to today's show.
Yes, isang pagpupugay para sa ating napakagaling at napakasipag na production team. This has been your Klimatotohanan, a fortnightly webcast organized and led by our climate reality leaders to tackle urgent climate issues of today and tomorrow. Bakit Klimatotohanan? Because we need real talk and real action on the climate crisis. Again, thank you and see you again in 2 weeks. Bye. Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Hello, those in the Zoom chat, please stay. We'll have a little photo op.